I'm Jason, your host, and today's episode is all about one of the biggest challenges many English learners face: how to think and speak in English. Whether you're a beginner or more advanced, today's episode will give you strategies to unlock fluency by shifting how you process English in your mind. Before we dive into today's topic, remember that English isn't just a language, it's a mindset. If you've ever felt like you have to translate everything in your head before speaking, you're not alone. But what if I told you there's a way to bypass that step entirely? That's what today's podcast is all about, helping you think in English so that speaking it becomes second nature. Part 1. The power of thinking in English. Now, before we can even talk about speaking in English, we have to tackle the very idea of thinking in English. You see, fluency doesn't start with the words coming out of your mouth. It begins in your brain. When you think in your native language and then try to translate it into English, you're adding a whole extra step. This slows you down and makes speaking English feel like a huge task. You've probably experienced that moment where you freeze because you're stuck trying to find the perfect word. But that's because you're not thinking directly in English. Here's an analogy. Imagine you're driving a car and instead of going straight down the road, you're forced to take a detour. This detour adds time and stress. That's exactly what happens when you think in your native language first and then translate to English. It's a detour. But when you train yourself to think in English, you'll be on the expressway to fluency. Let me give you an example. Think about your daily routine. Imagine you wake up in the morning and the first thing you think is, I need to brush my teeth. If you think this thought in English instead of your native language, you've already taken the first step toward fluency. At first, it might feel unnatural or forced, but over time, it'll become more automatic. Let's say you're at a cafe and you want to order a coffee. In your native language, you might think, I'll have a coffee, please. Then you translate that into English. But what if you could skip the translation step and just think, I'll have a coffee, please, directly in English? Suddenly, you're not just speaking English, you're living in English. The whole process becomes smoother and faster. Here's a concrete exercise you can try every day. Start with simple phrases that you use regularly, like I'm hungry, or it's time to go to work. Write these phrases down in English and practice thinking them every time the situation arises. Slowly, your brain will start to make the switch, and these thoughts will come more naturally in English. Part 2. Building vocabulary for thinking. One of the best ways to train your brain to think in English is by expanding your vocabulary. The more words you know, the easier it is to express your thoughts without hesitation. You might be wondering, how can I build my vocabulary without overwhelming myself? It's simple. Focus on learning words that are relevant to your daily life. Studies show that people who learn words in context, rather than in isolation, remember them better. For example, instead of memorizing a random list of words like apple, banana, chair, and table, try to learn vocabulary related to activities you do every day. If you love cooking, learn words like stir, boil, ingredients, and recipe. If you're into sports, learn terms like goal, score, and win. Here's another practical exercise. Carry a small notebook or use your phone to jot down new words throughout your day. When you hear or see a new word, write it down along with the context in which you heard it. For example, if you hear someone say multitask at work, you might write down multitask, to do more than one thing at a time, e.g., I'm multitasking at work. This helps you remember not just the word, but also how it's used in a sentence. Part 3. Speaking in English without thinking too much. Now that we've covered how to think in English, let's move on to speaking without overthinking. Often, the reason we struggle with speaking English is because we're too focused on being perfect. We worry about grammar, pronunciation, or choosing the right word, and this makes us freeze. But here's the thing. Native speakers aren't perfect either. Have you ever noticed how people speak in their native language? They make mistakes, they pause, they use filler words like or That's perfectly normal. Fluency doesn't mean perfection, it means communication. The goal is to get your message across, not to be grammatically perfect every time. Here's a long example. Let's say you're in a conversation with a friend, and you want to tell them about your weekend. You might say something like, "On Saturday, I went to the park with my family. It was really fun and we had a picnic." If you're worried about being perfect, you might hesitate because you're unsure if you should say went or have gone or if really fun sounds too casual. But in reality, your friend probably understands what you mean just fine. The key is to focus on communicating your message, not on making it flawless. One of the best exercises for speaking without overthinking is shadowing. Shadowing is when you listen to a native speaker and try to imitate exactly what they say, as quickly as possible. This trains your brain to form sentences more naturally, without stopping to think about each individual word. It's a little like training your muscles through repetition. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. Part 4. Use visualization to think in English. Visualization is another powerful tool for thinking and speaking in English. It involves picturing the situation in your mind and narrating it in English. For example, imagine you're planning to go shopping. Visualize yourself walking through the store, picking up items and paying at the checkout. As you visualize, narrate the scene in English in your head. I'm walking down the aisle. I see the cereal. I'm putting it in my basket. The more you practice visualization, the more natural it will feel to think in English. You'll start to associate English with real-world experiences, rather than seeing it as an abstract language to study. Part 5. Practice in real-life situations. Finally, the best way to solidify your ability to think and speak in English is through practice. And I don't just mean in a classroom or through apps. I mean real-life practice. Engage with native speakers, whether it's through online language exchanges, joining a local conversation club, or even practicing with friends who are also learning English. Real-life situations force your brain to react quickly. There's no time to stop and think, which pushes you to start thinking in English. You'll make mistakes. That's okay. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn. One long-term study showed that people who immerse themselves in real-life conversations in English improve their fluency much faster than those who only practiced in structured environments like classrooms. So, don't be afraid to get out there and practice. So there you have it. We've covered the importance of thinking in English, building your vocabulary, speaking without overthinking, using visualization, and practicing in real-life situations. The journey to fluency doesn't happen overnight, but with consistent effort and these strategies, you'll start to see real progress. Remember, the goal isn't perfection, it's communication. The more you practice thinking in English, the more natural it will become, and the more confident you'll feel when speaking.
I read your essay. Interesting ideas.
Thank you. Did you like it?
I did, but I noticed some grammar mistakes.
A lot.
Not too many, but enough to work on.
Can you tell me the biggest ones?
Let's start with the first paragraph. You wrote, "He go to the market every day."
Oh, that sounds wrong.
It is. Do you know why?
He goes should be he goes.
Correct. Third person singular needs an S.
Right. I always forget that.
It takes practice. Now, in the second paragraph, you wrote, "She didn't knew about the surprise."
Oh, I see it now. It should be she didn't know about the surprise.
Exactly. Didn't already makes the verb negative, so knew should be in its base form.
That makes sense.
Good. Now, let's talk about your conclusion.
In your conclusion, you wrote, "This is the reason why we should always help others."
Something sounds off.
Yes. Can you find the mistake?
Helps should it be just help?
Exactly. The verb should be in its base form after should.
Oh, so no S after should.
Right. Modal verbs like should, can, must always take the base form of the verb.
Got it. I'll remember that.
Good. Now, let's look at another sentence. People is responsible for their actions.
Oh, I think people is should be people are.
Correct. People is plural, so we use are.
That makes sense. I don't know why I wrote is.
It happens. English has many tricky rules.
Yeah, and I mix them up sometimes.
That's normal. Mistakes help you learn.
I hope I improve faster.
You're already improving, but one more thing, your sentence structure.
What's wrong with it?
Some sentences are too long. Look at this one. Since I was young, I always wanted to help others because I think kindness is important and people should always be there for each other so the world can be a better place.
Oh, wound, that is long.
Exactly. It's better to break it into 2 or 3 sentences.
How would you fix it?
Try this. Since I was young, I've always wanted to help others. I believe kindness is important. People should support each other so the world can be a better place.
Oh, that sounds much clearer.
Shorter sentences improve readability.
I'll keep that in mind.
Great. Overall, your essay is strong. Just focus on grammar and sentence structure.
Thank you. I'll revise it and try again.
That's the spirit. Keep practicing.